Picture an animal so massive, so powerful, and so devastatingly lethal that it can kill another creature with a single swipe of its enormous paw. A creature capable of moving silently across the Arctic ice with unshakable patience, waiting for hours on end to hunt its prey. A being that can detect the smell of a seal from over a kilometer away, and that's got a layer of fat 15 centimeters thick, allowing it to survive in temperatures that plunge to 50 degrees below zero. This isn't some fantasy monster or a legendary creature from ancient stories, but an absolutely real and fascinating animal that's dominated the frozen wastelands of the Arctic for tens of thousands of years. Welcome to the polar bear, Ursus maritimus, hands down one of the most extraordinary, most fearsome, and most fascinating predators on planet Earth, a creature whose entire existence depends on the sea ice covering the Arctic Ocean. The polar bear is the biggest bear in the world today, dwarfing its close relatives like the North American grizzly bear or the Eurasian brown bear. An adult male polar bear typically measures between 2.5 to 3 meters long from snout to tail, though some record-breaking specimens have hit up to 3.5 meters. The average adult male weighs somewhere between 400 to 600 kilograms, though especially large bears can tip the scales at 800 kilograms or more. To give you some perspective, an average male polar bear weighs about as much as 4 or 5 average adult humans combined. Females are way smaller, typically weighing between 200 to 350 kilograms, a significant size difference called sexual dimorphism. The polar bear's body structure is perfectly built for life in the extremely hostile and demanding Arctic environment. Unlike other bears that have relatively compact and robust bodies, the polar bear has a more elongated and streamlined frame, with longer, thinner limbs that let it move way more efficiently across the ice. Its paws are extraordinarily large, with hind paws reaching up to 30 centimeters long. The polar bear's claws aren't particularly long compared to other bears, but they're sharp and specifically designed to grip and tear apart the blubber of its prey. The bear's paws are covered with fur extending even onto the sole pads, providing traction on ice and extra thermal insulation. The polar bear's head is more slender and elongated compared to other bears with a distinctively long, narrow snout. Its eyes are relatively small compared to skull size, and while polar bears have decent vision, they rely way more on their absolutely incredible sense of smell to track down prey. The polar bear's sense of smell is widely considered one of the sharpest in the animal kingdom, possibly only matching a bloodhound's. Researchers believe the polar bear can detect a seal's scent from over a kilometer away, a feat that shows just how sophisticated its olfactory system is. Its ears are positioned on the sides of its head and let it pick up sounds like cracking ice or prey moving beneath the surface. The polar bear's fur is probably its most distinctive and striking feature. But here's the thing, contrary to what most people think, a polar bear's fur isn't actually white. Each individual hair in the bear's coat is transparent or translucent. The apparent white color comes from how these transparent hairs scatter and reflect light. Under all that transparent fur, the polar bear's skin is actually black, a fascinating detail most people have no idea about. This unique fur doesn't just provide almost perfect camouflage in the white Arctic landscape of ice and snow, it's also got extraordinary thermal properties. The fur is incredibly dense, with roughly 1,400 hairs per square centimeter, creating an insulating barrier of trapped air that keeps the bear's body heat locked in even in extreme cold. Beneath the fur, the polar bear is covered in a thick layer of blubber, or fat, that typically measures between 15 to 30 centimeters thick. This fat layer serves multiple crucial functions for the bear's survival in the Arctic. First, it provides extraordinary thermal insulation, allowing the bear to maintain a core body temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius, even when surrounded by ocean water that's barely above freezing. Second, the fat layer works as a concentrated energy storage system. A gram of fat contains roughly 9 calories of energy, which is more than double what you get from carbs or proteins. When the polar bear doesn't have access to food, like during summer months when the sea ice melts, it can survive by burning through its accumulated fat reserves. The polar bear is an obligate carnivore, meaning its diet consists almost entirely of meat, especially animal fat. In its natural Arctic habitat, the polar bear's main prey is seals, specifically 3 species: ringed seals, bearded, seals, and harp seals. Polar bears also occasionally hunt belugas and narwhals as well as walruses, though a full-grown walrus is a serious challenge even for a polar bear. The reason the polar bear focuses mostly on seals is because seals have a thick fat layer under their skin, and the polar bear is way more interested in eating this blubber than the lean muscle. An adult polar bear needs to consume roughly 2 kilograms of fat daily to maintain its body weight and energy reserves. The polar bear's hunting technique is an example of patience and predatory intelligence taken to the extreme. The polar bear waits motionless for hours next to a breathing hole in the ice, an opening that a seal keeps open to breathe air. When a seal surfaces to breathe, the polar bear strikes instantly with its front paw, trying to hit the seal hard enough to kill or stun it. Success rates for this hunting technique are notoriously low, with tons of attempts ending in failure. It's estimated that polar bears succeed in less than 10% of their hunts, meaning a bear might need multiple attempts to score a meal. When it does succeed, the polar bear focuses first on eating its prey's fat, often abandoning the rest of the carcass once the blubber has been stripped away. The polar bear's metabolism is extraordinarily adapted to the Arctic's seasonal cycles. During winter and spring, when sea ice is present and hunting is possible, the polar bear eats massive amounts of food, building up huge, fat reserves in its body. During summer and fall, when sea ice melts and disappears, leaving nowhere to hunt seals, the polar bear must survive without eating, a period that can last up to 4 months. During this fasting time, the polar bear drastically reduces its metabolism, staying in a prolonged rest state where it barely moves. Researchers have discovered that during fasting periods, the polar bear can lose up to 1 kilogram of body weight daily, meaning it can shed up to 120 kilograms over 4 months without food. Despite this massive weight loss, the polar bear doesn't enter true hibernation like other bears do, but rather a state of lethargy where it maintains a high core body temperature. Polar bear reproduction is highly synchronized with the Arctic's seasonal cycles. Female polar bears reach sexual maturity around 5 or 6 years old. Mating happens in spring, typically between April and May, when seals are abundant for hunting. Gestation lasts roughly 8 months, but here's where polar bear biology gets wild. Females don't actually start significant embryonic development until months after mating. This phenomenon is called delayed implantation, and it lets the female wait to confirm she's got enough fat reserves to handle pregnancy, birth, and nursing. If a female doesn't have adequate reserves, she can reabsorb the embryo and skip the pregnancy entirely. Birth typically happens in November or December, when the female is holed up in a maternity den dug into a deep snowbank. Litters usually consist of 1 or 2 cubs, though 3 occasionally happens. The cubs are born absolutely tiny, typically weighing around 600 to 700 grams, roughly the weight of a large apple. Newborn cubs are blind, deaf, and totally dependent on their mum for survival. During those first months in the den, the mother provides body heat and super-rich milk that feeds the cubs. Polar bear milk is extraordinarily rich in fat, containing roughly 30% fat, a concentration that drives rapid growth in the cubs. The cubs stay in the maternity den until spring, typically from November through March, a period of about 4 to 5 months. During this whole time without eating, the mother survives completely on her accumulated fat reserves, producing milk for her cubs while fasting. This is an extraordinary feat of physiological endurance that shows just how extreme polar bear adaptation to the Arctic is. When the cubs emerge from the den in spring, they weigh roughly 3 to 4 kilograms, having grown from 600 grams to thousands of times their birth weight, powered almost entirely by their mother's milk. When they hit daylight for the first time, they typically follow their mom straight toward the sea ice, where she gets back to hunting seals to replenish her severely depleted reserves. The mother-cub bond in polar bears is intense and dedicated. The mother teaches her cubs the hunting skills necessary for survival, showing them how to locate breathing holes in the ice and how to properly attack seals. The cubs stay with their mum for roughly 2.5 to 3 years, an extraordinarily long period compared to many other carnivorous mammals. During this extended time, the cubs develop the skills needed to survive independently. Cub survival rates in the first years of life are significantly lower than adults, with lots of cubs starving if their mother isn't a particularly successful hunter. The geographic range of the polar bear is tightly restricted to the Arctic region, specifically areas where sea ice forms during winter. Polar bears are found around the Arctic Ocean, including parts of Canada, Russia, Alaska, Greenland, and Norway. Researchers have identified roughly 19 distinct polar bear populations, each with slightly different characteristics and located in different Arctic regions. Some populations live in the Canadian archipelago, others on the ice platform around Greenland, and still others on the sea ice around Russia and Alaska. The total number of wild polar bears is estimated at around 20 to 30,000 individuals, a surprisingly low number for a top-tier predatory mammal. The polar bear is an extraordinary swimmer that can stay in the water for hours without excessive fatigue. Its dense fur keeps it so insulated that it loses body heat surprisingly slowly, even when submerged in extremely cold ocean water. Researchers have documented polar bears swimming in a straight line for over 100 kilometers, though even for these incredible swimmers, that's exhausting. During summer, when sea ice melts and vanishes, polar bears living in regions with limited sea ice might be forced to swim massive distances between ice fragments, using water travel as a way to get between potential hunting areas. Climate change has seriously increased the distance many polar bears need to swim during summer, which burns enormous amounts of energy and causes physiological stress. The polar bear's social behavior is relatively limited, though not completely solitary like people used to think. Polar bears are generally solitary animals, spending most of their adult lives independently, except during mating or when mothers are raising cubs. However, in areas where food availability creates bear concentrations, like in dumps where food piles up or around whale carcasses that have washed ashore, multiple bears can gather in close proximity. In these situations, polar bears establish a fairly clear social hierarchy based on body size and age, with the biggest males generally being dominant. Conflicts between bears over food can be brutal and sometimes result in death, though they often get resolved through threats or limited aggression. Polar bear communication happens mainly through scent and behavior, rather than vocalizations. Polar bears leave scent marks to communicate their presence to other bears, indicating age, sex, and reproductive status. Females mark their territory during periods of sexual receptiveness to attract males. Polar bears also use complex body language, including ear positions, tail positions, and head movements, to communicate intentions with other bears. Occasionally, they emit sounds like growls or loud roars, especially in threatening situations or when defending food territory. Climate change represents the most significant and immediate threat to polar bear survival right now. Arctic sea ice is melting earlier every year and forming later in fall, shrinking the window when bears can hunt seals. As the ice season gets shorter, polar bears have less time to build up the fat reserves they need to survive summer months without food. Polar bear populations in regions experiencing shorter ice seasons are showing signs of nutritional stress, including lower body weights, reduced reproduction rates, and decreased survival rates. Predictive models suggest that if climate change continues at its current pace, many polar bear populations could face serious decline over the next few decades. In the early 1990s, the total polar bear population was estimated to have dropped to maybe 5,000 to 10,000 individuals because of extensive commercial hunting throughout the 20th century. However, through international conservation efforts and implementing hunting regulations, populations bounced back to their current number of roughly 20,000 to 30,000. This is a conservation success story, though the success is being contradicted by emerging climate change threats. International conservation organizations now classify the polar bear as vulnerable, a classification reflecting concerns about future climate change threats. The polar bear's diet during summer months when there's no sea ice is particularly interesting. Although it would prefer to hunt seals, many polar bears during summer consume a diverse variety of alternative foods. They'll eat water bird eggs, young, chicks, small mammals like ground squirrels, plants like berries and kelp, and occasionally carrion. Some polar bears have learned to hunt narwhals and belugas in open water, though this technique is way less efficient than hunting seals on ice. In some regions, polar bears have gotten used to exploring human settlements looking for food, rummaging through dumps, or breaking into food storage. Researchers have done exhaustive studies on the unique polar bear physiology that lets it exist in such An extreme environment. The polar bear's cardiovascular system is modified so it can maintain stable blood pressure and efficient blood flow even in extreme temperatures. Its kidneys are specialized to conserve body water in an environment where fresh water is scarce. The polar bear's digestive system is optimized to efficiently process a high-calorie, high-fat diet. Researchers have even discovered that the polar bear has a unique ability to process cholesterol way more efficiently than most mammals, an adaptation necessary given its extremely fat-heavy diet. The polar bear's vision is reasonably decent, though nothing exceptional. Studies suggest the polar bear can see about as well as humans in most lighting conditions. However, smell is clearly the dominant sense for polar bears, followed by hearing. The polar bear's eyes are positioned on the sides of its head, providing wide peripheral vision but limited binocular vision compared to humans. The polar bear has evolved to compensate, relying way more on its extraordinary sense of smell to navigate its environment. Polar bears have a very defined annual cycle that's completely synchronized with Arctic sea ice. In fall, when sea ice starts forming again after the summer melt, polar bears move toward where the ice is beginning to form, shifting geographically to stay in contact with sea ice. During winter, when ice is most extensive, polar bears have access to the maximum amount of hunting territory and can find optimal hunting opportunities. In spring, while ice is still around but has been present for months, polar bears reach peak food consumption, rapidly gaining weight. In summer, when ice melts, bears get stranded on land or leftover ice, entering their fasting period. Polar bear longevity in the wild is typically 20 to 30 years, though exceptional individuals can live longer. Females tend to live longer than males, probably because males engage in more frequent fighting over mates and resources, resulting in serious injuries. In captivity, polar bears can live up to 40 years, a substantial extension of their natural lifespan. However, keeping polar bears in captivity presents major challenges because zoo environments can never truly replicate the complex dynamic environment of the natural Arctic. The polar bear's future clearly depends on humanity's ability to address global climate change. If global temperatures keep rising at the current rate, many polar bear populations will face severe survival pressures. However, polar bear populations have also shown surprising capacity for adaptation and resilience in the past. Some researchers speculate that in the distant future, if sea ice completely disappears, some polar bears could potentially adapt to a more terrestrial lifestyle, taking advantage of new food sources available in warming Arctic regions. While this remains speculative, it shows the sophistication and flexibility of polar bears as predators. What remains clear is that the polar bear, that majestic king of the Arctic, will continue being a symbol of wilderness, an emblem of the fragile Arctic environment, and a reminder of the extraordinary challenges even the most formidable predators face on a changing planet.